Chapter 17. Shane has read this situation to the end, Rayburn said positively. He knows Dutcher can give me more trouble than any other man on this range. Fay is on the pitchfork right now, I'm sure of it. Landis shook his head wonderingly.
Well, it sure sounds incredible after what has happened. Nothing short of desperation would drive Dutcher to such a resort.
That's what did it. Rayburn had told the other of the savage chase, which had ended in the death of Dutcher's companions. We picked up Fay's sign at daylight. After a couple of hours, we lost it for good. But there was enough to show that he was making straight for Shane's spread. There was nowhere else he could have gone. They were talking in the judge's chambers in Salt Creek. Rayburn had come here directly upon reaching town. Trail dust grimed the tight lines on his face and whitened his clothes. Landis studied his expression soberly and then shook his head again.
Shane's been a curse on this country for years, he declared. Anything Cass Gunnarsson built up, he has deliberately tore down. He's as hard to reach now as he was when his crowd was in here in town. If he's protecting Dutcher, I don't see how you can reach Fay short of a massacre.
Rayburn said flatly, I'll bring him in, or finish him. Dutcher knows that. Something in the words told Landis that sooner or later this man would do as he said. They were still discussing the matter when a violent knocking sounded at the door, and without waiting for an answer, a man ran in. It was Giff Naylor. Excitement rode him hard.
Clark, he cried, now's our chance. Fay Dutcher and a dozen pitchforkers just rode in. They're taking up at the old trail, and I hear Fay's bragging he's out to get you. This is plumb made to order for us. We'll gather up the town and clean house of all them gents. They'll never give us a better chance.
Breaking off, he waited for the quick response he had no doubt would come. In the surprise of hearing that Fay had ridden boldly into Salt Creek, Rayburn and Landis exchanged glances. You see, Rayburn grunted, giving no hint of what he had told at the news. Shane's been working on Dutcher. He stood up, tall and lean, outwardly unmoved. The look on his face said that there were some trails a man couldn't avoid taking. To Naylor, he saw, was a curious lack of inflection. I'll take care of Fay. I've seen this coming. You keep an eye on those pitchfork boys for me. Giff stared.
You mean you're gonna go out there and meet Dutcher? He demanded.
Rayburn might never have heard the question. I don't want any wild plays, Giff. Just remember that. Naylor looked at Landis dubiously and then scratched his chin. Plainly at a loss, he said, Okay, Clark, and then turned away. Silence held till he shut the door behind him, and then Landis cleared his throat.
That was bound to come someday.
Rayburn nodded. He appeared lost in thought, in no hurry to move. There was a faraway look in his eyes. What a damn shame, he muttered, as if to himself. Fay was always a good kid. A little wild, but... The words were broken off by a new arrival. Rayburn turned his head as the door opened to admit Loren Colcord. Something like relief washed over her face, drained of its blood at the sight of Rayburn. It was more than enough to tell that she was fully aware of the situation.
Oh, here you are,
she exclaimed.
Good morning, Loren,
said Landis. She gave him a strange smile, but said nothing. Plainly her concern lay with Rayburn now. Landis added,
Excuse me a minute,
and then turned to the inner door. Loren and Rayburn were scarcely aware of his departure, gazing at each other. He would have given anything not to see her just at this time, not to have to talk to her, but she had no intention of allowing this moment to pass without grasping it firmly.
Clark, you cannot go out there, she said quickly. You'll be killed.
He knew in instant gratification that her first thought was of his safety, but he only shook his head. The words, when they came, were forced out against his will. I got to go, Loren, or I'll never be able to hold up my head again. Leaping fear tore her eyes wide.
Clark, no!
She cried. She got command of herself then, and her voice was steady.
Do I mean anything to you, Clark?
His breath caught, but there was no hesitation in him, for his eyes spoke even before he opened his lips. More than my life, he assured her huskily.
If I do, you won't go.
Rayburn digested that while she watched him. His chin came up, and it seemed to her that he stiffened. Certainly something happened in his eyes, something that was not pleasant to watch. I'm sorry, Loren, he said slowly, but I've got to go. She never knew the fight he had to win before voicing his decision, yet unconsciously she used the most telling argument she could have devised.
Clark, think,
she urged, voice tense.
This isn't just for today, just for now. It may make a difference for always.
I'm sorry, he began again, doggedly. She saw then that she could never sway him, that proud and headstrong as he was, no words could alter his determination. Tears stung down her lids, and the paleness of her face was accentuated.
Clark, kiss me before you go,
she whispered. Rayburn never would have said he could find this moment as hard as it was. His arms went around her as if there was another man doing this. Somehow, they were both being forced to it against their wills. He would have stepped back quickly, but for a moment she clung to him.
You're so hard, Clark, she murmured unbrokenly. Both you and Fay are as unyielding as a rock. What does this law mean between you? Nothing. I think it was meant to be this way from the beginning. The law is no more than an excuse.
Rayburn broke away abruptly, and for the first time his face was harsh. That's not true. He managed to control his tone. Fay is outside the law that I am sworn to uphold. He wanted it that way. Now he must answer for it. He hauled up shortly, jarred by his own tone. In a flash, he recognized in her words the more subtle of argument she had used yet, meaning nothing except as it influenced him. The grimness in his eyes did not relax. Put your fears at rest, he said woodenly to her. Nothing's going to be happening to me.
I'm more worried about what may happen to myself,
she replied, with the quick change of front which had always bewildered him in her. What did she mean by that, he wondered. There was no time to find out, however. The door opened and Landis returned, and Rayburn turned to him. Would you take Miss Colquitt home, please?
Of course,
Landis assented.
I was just about to suggest that myself.
There was a stiffness in this room. Landis felt it like a fog between these two strong-willed people. Gallantly he pretended that it was not there. He left with the girl a moment later, and for several minutes, as they made their way towards the parsonage, he waited for her to speak, well aware of how easy it would be to blunder now into saying the wrong thing. Loren kept silent, however. At the parsonage door, Landis said gently, You're troubled about this, Loren?
Wilkins, I'm terribly worried, she burst out. Isn't there anything that can be done?
But she knew the answer even before he spoke. If you mean whether Clark can be swayed from his purpose, not a thing.
But don't be too deeply concerned, Loren. Nothing can happen to him that he doesn't want to. I'm convinced of it. But it's what he's doing to himself, she cried. Don't you see? He'll never get over it.
Landis shook his head.
I don't believe you fully understand, Clark Rayburn, he answered, more to soothe her than anything. You must feel that this will come out all right.
She thanked him for bringing her home, and then they parted. But as Landis walked down and then turned back towards town, Loren told herself that anything would be better than waiting here. There was something terrible in knowing the wings of a dark angel fluttered above Salt Creek, and that she had allowed herself to be persuaded by nothing that she could do. She had long suspected the true state of her feelings towards Clark Rayburn. But as the morning dragged out, her bewildered thinking circled about the question of whether she knew this man who had laid claim to her innermost being, or if he was some stranger whom she had never known and could never come to understand. Loren had discovered what was afoot this morning accidentally. She had gone on an errand to the home of a neighbor and there learned the facts. Even yet her father was unconscious of the tension in this town, but though she had heard him moving about his study, always a sign that he was not too busy for interruption, she preferred not to go to him. One thing held her attention, and one thing only, the knowledge that sooner or later gunshots would ring out, and that she would not know what they meant. At noon she felt that she could bear it no longer. Bronson Colcord stepped to the door of his study as she entered the hall. "Going out, my dear?" He smiled. "Yes, She was so distraught that she had all she could do to control her voice. "I must go out for a moment. I'll be back shortly, Father." He stared in surprise as she hurried past and let herself out. She did not look back. Reaching the corner of Parallel Street, she began to hurry. The strange silence of these streets struck her at once. They were deserted. Even the children usually playing in the yards beyond sagging picket fences were absent. Something caught at her like a portent of disaster. Her feet quickened. To find Parallel Street so quiet was strange enough, but that Main Street itself should be empty of life was so unusual she halted uncertainly. But there was no turning back. She forced herself on, past Shane and Purcell's old store, past the bank and the Pecos house. A man standing at the hotel door seemed about to call out to her, but he thought better of it. The courthouse fronted on the little plaza, shaded by a cottonwood, and there was an alley giving access to the sheriff's office on its side, but Loren passed its front entrance and went down the hall. She was making for Rayburn's office. Almost invariably his door stood open, but it was closed now. She paused with her hand on the knob, asking herself whether Clark was inside, and then, turning the knob firmly, she thrust the door open. The room was empty. Loren drew in her breath sharply at that. It could only mean one thing. Whirling, she ran to the outside door, left the building. And now it seemed strange to her that she had thought Main Street deserted before. From where she stood, she could see 4, 5, 6 men. All were townsmen whom she'd seen at one time or another at church. Abe Traynor stood in the arch of Wilter's livery barn. Heck Newsom leaned at the corner of Conway's grocery. The others were in equally important positions. All were elaborately casual, and all were armed. Loren started forward resolutely. She would speak to Traynor or Newsom, inquire where Rayburn could be found. Before she reached either, however, she stopped suddenly, feet rooted on the plank sidewalk. At a distance of several hundred yards, a man backed into sight around the corner of Hanson's saloon. A man with guns in his hands, crouching with a terrible tightness. She knew that stalwart, blocky form, and the thick, bull-like neck, and the short legs slightly bowed. Fay Dutcher. Loren wanted to cry out, to call to him. She could not. Her tongue clove to the roof of her mouth. All she could do was stare, horror in her eyes. "Ma'am, come on out of there!" A harsh voice called from somewhere. The words didn't seem to mean anything to her, nor did she turn to see who had spoken. The call was not repeated. Dutcher was in the road now. Dust puffed up under his feet. He didn't lift his boots, slide them along. He moved with cat-like care, ready for instant action. Loren saw another man further along, coming along the walls of the building towards Faye. It was Rayburn. His step was measured, his visage absolutely unreadable. She tried to scream then, to halt this thing, and found that she couldn't. It was Dutcher who broke the electric silence. "Go for your iron, Rayburn," he taunted harshly. "I'm waiting for you." He was drunk. Even the girl read that, wretched by the pity of it. Still Rayburn came on, wordless, his gaze level. But for his determination, he might have been utterly alone in the street. "Damn you, cut loose!" Faye squealed fiercely. Rayburn did not so much as hesitate. "Drop those guns, Faye," he droned. "I'm sticking you in the pen till you sober up." It was useless. Even Loren understood that Dutcher could not be swayed from the showdown he was facing. For an answer, as Rayburn took another step forward, he twitched up his gun and fired. At point-blank range, it seemed impossible he could have missed, yet somehow he did. Rayburn halted at a distance of less than 60 yards. He had not changed expression in the slightest, but his tall frame stiffened, and his hand blurred at his side, and the shot was simultaneously with Faye's second. Neither fired again. Dutcher lurched as if struck by an invisible lightning bolt. His guns dropped, and he took a single stumbling step, and then measured his length in the dust. Loren's first sensation was one of faintness threatening to engulf her. She fought it off, conscious that suddenly the tension had snapped. As if on a prearranged signal, men appeared from everywhere, boiling out of doors and round corners, some of them yelling instruction to others who failed to listen. In the space of few seconds, Main Street was strangely crowded as it had been strangely deserted the moment before. She was only half aware of it. All this was ghastly to her. It was murder. In her eyes, no justification of law would serve to make it anything different. A man kneeling beside Faye Dutcher straightened. "Out like a light," he exclaimed harshly. "He took her plumb in the brisket. He never knew what struck him." Loren saw Rayburn push through the gathered men. He bent down, then straightened with Faye's body in his arms. With a curt word for the others to make way, he pushed through towards the little undertaker's establishment next to the bank. Beneath his inscrutable face, she read more depth of feeling than if he had displayed his anguish for all to see. Loren turned away then. She would have given anything to not have been witness to Faye Dutcher's killing. Her skin was cold and her limbs trembled. Suddenly she was conscious of a man beside her. It was Mark Dorby, a merchant who had given her father considerable support in building the church. Dorby was stout, white-haired. His full cheeks were lined with scarlet threads. Just now his face bespoke the utmost gravity and concern. "This is no place for a lady, ma'am," he said gruffly. "Maybe I could take you somewheres." Wordlessly she let him have her arm, and they started off. But Dorby halted the next moment to gaze, his thick brows bushy, and Loren forced herself to follow his look. Upwards of a dozen men were emerging from a saloon down the street, the old trail. They were pitchfork punchers, and for once their customary assurance had deserted them. Their horses stood at the hitch rack before the saloon, and one by one they twitched loose the looped reins and swung aboard. In a compact group, they rode up the street, heading out of town. A number of townsmen watched warily, despite their appearance of idleness. Mark Dorby grunted. Reckon Shane's crowd knows better than to kick up a ruckus after this. When Rayburn emerged in the open a few minutes later and started up the street, the watching men let him go. Not a one of them but was aware of what was going on in his mind. They saw him reach the courthouse and then turn in. Passing down the corridor and pausing at his office door, Rayburn's step was heavy. He had never expected his shoulders to be bowed under the weight they supported now. Heaving a sigh, he stepped in and stopped short, face to face with Loren, and she was alone. For a moment their eyes held, and she could see now how shaken he was, and his voice was husky. I had to kill him, Loren. My friend. There was a supplication in the words, and unconsciously she backed away a step. It was murder, Clark, she said steadily, her face cold and strange. That seemed to awaken him. No, Loren, he got out. It was the law, the only kind Faye could understand. He gazed at her, his eyes dull with pain. It was a terrible moment for him, finding himself accused by the only person whose opinion meant anything to him. Faye knew what was coming, he struggled on, endeavoring to explain. I warned him. I gave him his chance to ride out of the country. He knew I would never follow him. Instead, he rode into town. Then he got drunk and bragged that he'd kill me. My duty was plain, Loren. Surely you can see that. He was frankly pleading now, but she refused to listen. Some door in her nature, which had always been open to him, was suddenly closed. It was murder, cruel and needless. She gazed at him as across an abyss. When she spoke, it was a tone he'd never heard her use before. Clark, if we're ever going to mean anything to each other, you must hang up your guns, turn in your star. I could never live another day like this. I couldn't even face you knowing you have another man's blood on your hands from choice. That was the struggle that went on in him was evident. He half lifted an imploring hand, only to let it drop. Loren, I'd do even that for you, he said huskily. End of chapter 17.